Energy demand down 20% or more in many areas. And some of that 20% energy demand reduction likely to remain as we have some individuals that are sticky in terms of their work from home situation. In other words, they don't move back to an office even when the economy reopens. That has effects wherever you have a merit order between different energy resources on the grid. So in other words, the ones with lowest marginal cost or zero marginal cost, renewable energy resources, will likely continue to run to meet whatever energy demand there is. And the biggest losers from a dampened energy demand curve or a shifted energy demand curve are likely to be inflexible coal plants. So is it possible that at the very least in the United States, coal plant retirements could be moved up in time? This is a distinct possibility. For the clean energy sector writ large, in the long run, it will likely be a fortuitous event. If oil and gas looks to have lower for longer prices in that sector, it will only increase the relative attractiveness of renewable energy investments, which have a typically lower but more stable and predictable income stream. And of course, with the economic response and the monetary response to the coronavirus crisis, pushing interest rates down yet further into negative territory, or in the case of the United States, to the zero bound, it will create even more attractive financing conditions for renewable energy as opposed to other energy resources, given that many clean energy projects are, of course, capital intensive up front, but have lower marginal ongoing costs. And then, of course, we can't extricate the fact that the future of the energy sector, the future of the energy transition post-coronavirus, will play out in a world not only in which the future magnitude and composition of energy demand coming out of the crisis is critical, but also one in which capital providers are increasingly no longer passive, but are increasingly active in shaping the future of the energy sector. In other words, will the oil and gas sector, even if oil prices rebound, be able to attract the same level of investment from institutional investors, family offices, pension funds, et cetera, which now have more stringent environmental social governance screens in place? And of course, the very definitions of what is dirty, what is clean, and what is everything in between will matter immensely as well. We see this over in Europe, as you know very well, with the European Investment Bank's criteria for energy investments and with the EU green taxonomy, whether natural gas, whether carbon capture and storage, whether biofuels, certain energy infrastructure projects will be left in or out of that conceptual framework known as the EU green taxonomy. The collapse of the oil price in the US has sort of laid bare a phenomenon which has been going on for quite a few years. The U.S. oil sector, the shale sector here in the United States, has been something of a Ouroboros, right? The traditional snake which eats its own tail, in that we've relied on inexpensive capital provided by yield-seeking investors, those which had few other places to turn to find to generate returns of 5, 6, 7%. And so what's essentially happened is you've had cash flow negative shale production, which has been receiving continued credit and continued financing in order to pull forward production from the future to today in the hopes of higher oil prices. Now, this activity has been underwritten, of course, up until now by OPEC, the OPEC Plus coalition's continued willingness to cut. But going forward, I think you're going to see a few things. Shale will not bounce back as quickly as it did in 2014 and 15. The overall availability of capital will shrink. There will be fewer entities willing to provide capital to this sector. Some banks will show increased reticence. And of course, some of the institutional investors that might otherwise be investing in this high yield credit in the shale sector will be less willing to get in, even if prices rise. And more interestingly, structurally, you may see a shift away from the oil services providers, the Baker Hughes, the Schlumbergers, the Halliburtons of the world, a pivot away from oil and gas. This is the boom bust of oil and gas in the shale sector towards more long-lived projects like offshore oil and gas, as well as a pivot by those very oil services players more into renewables and clean energy as well. And so that, all things being equal, will increase the cost structure in the shale sector, just at a time when it needs for that cost structure to decline. And so I think what you're going to see is shale's not going to go away. Acreage doesn't go bankrupt, even if companies do. It will still be there under the ground, but it will grow at a far more modest pace than it has than we've seen over the past half decade to decade.